My name is Bruce Fine. I've worked in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, for approximately 5 decades. I've served as Associate Deputy Attorney General, General Counsel of the Federal Communications Commission, Counsel to the Joint Congressional Committee on Covert Arms Sales to Iran, worked in the media, worked in think tanks and at universities. Never have I encountered anything so grisly as the mass killings and oppression that's now occurring in Nigeria.
My name is Bruce Devalier, and I am a partner in the law firm of Fine and Devalier, along with Bruce Fine. I was formerly a nuclear engineer before going to law school. I am a trial lawyer, I am a civil litigator, and we are involved in civil rights cases throughout the world and constitutional rights cases in the United States of America. We are honored to represent the Igbo people. I would echo being absolutely appalled at what is going on in Nigeria, both to the Igbo people, the Biafran cause, and the people in Nigeria in general. Something has to be done, and we're here, along with the people of the Quinche, to try to make the world a better place.
Today, the 12th of February 2019, you met with the prosecutor's office. Can you describe for us what took place there?
Yes, I believe it's February 11th, but I'm sure you just misspoke, Monday. And we met with the Chief Prosecutor's Office of the International Criminal Court to submit a petition. And my partner here could show what it is. It's called the Prosecutor versus President Muhammadu Buhari and Army Chief of Staff Yusuf Buratai. And the petition asks the prosecutor to open investigations against both gentlemen for genocide and crimes against humanity targeting the Igbo people in the Biafran territory. The submission was pursuant to Article 15 of the Rome Statute. This is a statute that was ratified by the government of Nigeria itself, which gives the International Criminal Court jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute these crimes. Now, under the International Criminal Court, the judges are selected by a panel related to the United Nations. It's a court whose jurisdiction is global. It's not limited to a particular nation. And we submitted the petition under Article 15 that instructs the chief prosecutor to move forward with what's called a pretrial chamber to open an investigation if there are reasonable grounds to believe that the crimes alleged have transpired. Now, we, at time being, are leaving the contents of our petition confidential. They become property of the chief prosecutor. You could imagine that names that are associated with the petition would be targeted by Mr. Buhari and Mr. Buratai for retaliation. And indeed, the risk is so high that even the officials in the prosecutor's office with whom we spoke remained anonymous because of the omnipresent fear factor. We are permitted to supplement the case, which now has a number, if there arises additional proof of killing, slaughter, persecution of the Igbo people in Biafra. We could ask a new investigation be opened. And we were told we could wait about 2 months, maybe a little bit more, before we receive an initial feedback whether the complaint is within the proper jurisdiction, which we are confident it is. But that is what we're here for, to have justice for the noble people of Igbo who have suffered very, very long time without any redress in Nigerian courts.
Thank you very much.
Bruce, why don't you add your comments?
Do you have something to add to this?
The only thing that I would add is this petition was prepared by our law firm in Washington, D.C., both Mr. Fine and myself, Mr. Devalier, but it was only possible through the help of a great many people in Nigeria that had the courage to come forward and document these activities that have been going on since the inauguration of President Muhammadu Buhari in 2015. I believe it was July 29th, 2015. At approximately 2 months later, he appointed Buratai, General Buratai, as his chief of staff. These people have engaged, along with the bulk of the military, the police forces, and security forces, in an effort to, we believe, genocidally destroy the Igbo people. As many of you know who are Igbo that are watching this, the nation of Biafra arose and was destroyed by the Republic back in the late 60s, early 70s. Since that time, the Igbo Biafrans have suffered mightily, unlike perhaps for the long term any other people on the planet. And this suffering has been in silence for much of the time period that it has been going on. The time for silence is now over. It is now time for the world to see it for what it is. It is genocide. It is an effort to kill people because of their ethnic heritage, their tribal affiliation, if you will, the fact that they're Igbos, also because of their religion, Christianity, primarily Catholic and Anglican. That sets them apart in the eyes of the people that are running Nigeria now. There's an effort to destroy these people and to cause economic waste in their 5 states. That is the purpose of this petition. We are hopeful this petition will bring their plight to the world, but we're even more hopeful that it will result in a prosecution. We have been assured that this matter will be treated seriously. We have also been assured that this matter supplements things that are presently before the International Criminal Court. The days of Mr. Buhari, President Buhari, doing what he wishes to the people of Nigeria, we are hopeful will come to a close. We are hopeful for a positive result in the upcoming elections. We are hopeful for no violence. We are not, however, optimistic. We are here to help the many people that have suffered and have struggled and have died, and those that have lived and remain in this fight. And we will carry the fight for as long as it takes.
One thing I would just add is that we're heartened by a very bold video recording made by the chief prosecutor herself, warning Mr. Buhari that if there was fraud, electoral violence on February 16th in the presidential balloting, the International Criminal Court was fully prepared to prosecute those who were complicit. And she knew that as soon as she made the statement, she would be targeted by Mr. Buhari, like the Saudi Arabians targeted Jamal Khashoggi. And yet she had the strength and courage to make the statement anyway. So I think that should provide some inspiration within Nigeria to those who know the conditions and can overcome a natural fear about voicing it outside Nigeria.
One of the things that I would like to also point out is we have detailed in this petition a number of the tragedies and the massacres that are well known. The Onitsha, the Alhambra, the Heroes' Day celebrations, the rally for President Trump on January 20th in 2016 to celebrate his inauguration. Those people were slaughtered. Those individuals were slaughtered at that time too. And we would also like to thank the journalists, the heroic journalists that are presenting this matter to you right now, Dr. Chukwunulu Ndubisi,
Yes.
and Madaforo Afnadu.
Yes.
My Igbo is a little rusty. I used to know how to say, "I will be your tiger and defend you." I can't say that right now.
Thank you.
But we thank you all for the assistance and for the opportunity to assist you in these matters.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up. Attorney Bruce, fan. You wrote an article in 2015 in Washington Times accusing President Buhari of lying and deceit to Washington, D.C. And likewise, in 2017, you made a trip to the eastern part of Nigeria, the Biafran land. Can you tell us a little bit how your visit and the article you wrote have worked for you to travel all the way from Washington, D.C. to Netherlands to do this filing?
But what I was able to observe and experience with my partner here, Bruce Del Valle, was confirmation of the terrorization, if you will, atmosphere in the lands occupied primarily by Igbos that have been precipitated by Mr. Buhari. It was clear even with those who were attending the hotel that they would speak sotto voce, no one could hear them, very thankful, effusive, if you will, that somebody was willing to open an ear to the persecution they had suffered. at the hotel. The Army is calling it AK-47s. They have barbed wire at the top. The city of Enugu itself looked like it had bombed. You know, it reminded me of Great Britain after World War II. Scars, you could see destroyed buildings there, impoverished conditions. And so that gives verisimilitude to things that become more than just, unfortunately, dry statistics. The numbers are so alarming, it's hard to, you know, to have an emotional tie as opposed to seeing just one grim face. And all the pictures and the photos that were not doctored, that are truly grisly. I mean, it's hard to look at more than a couple of them. It was like a photo tour through the Holocaust Museum, is what it was like. The kind of chilling effect that a human being could treat someone in such a gruesome fashion was almost unfathomable. And those are the kinds of things that have made it a cause, if you will, to bring Mr. Buhari to justice, because they do believe that if it wasn't him, the situation would be quite different. He's the mastermind behind everything. Nothing moves in Nigeria without his approval.
And we also believe, and I speak for myself, and I think for Mr. Fine and the folks that are involved in this effort, that it is just him, and it is just Mr. Buratai and a few others. That once they are removed, once they are dealt with, Nigeria, the wonder of Nigeria, this amazing country, a multi-ethnic country, the heart of Africa, the head of Africa, the soul of Africa is in Nigeria. That's why it's so important. Because if Nigeria gets torn asunder again, it will be much worse this time, and the entirety of Africa will be lost. So leaders like Buhari need to be replaced. They need to go. It needs to be leadership of all of the greatness of Nigeria, and not focused on the interest perhaps of one group to the exclusion and the violent exclusion of others. And we're hopeful that this petition once again will shine a light and lead to the effort to remove Mr. Buhari and to deal with him in the manner that bespeaks the crimes that he has committed.
As we await further directives from the International Criminal Court, what do you think will be done to help fasten the process?
We don't control the speed necessarily, but we're told by the Chief Prosecutor's Office that if there are any in Nigeria who have that courage to continue to report of the ongoing persecution and oppression of Ibos, they should communicate that to us directly or indirectly, because we now have a case number and we can supplement the evidence that we provided to prove our case of the crimes. So the more people feel emboldened, the faster and the more efficiently the investigation will be conducted. Now, we understand that it can be frightening given the past history and the want for retribution by Mr. Buhari. Indeed, I believe it was Governor Obiano in Biafra who recently said if you voted for PDP, they would kill you. So it's that kind of naked, raw terror that persists, and evidence of that is coming to us will be readily transmitted to the Chief Prosecutor.
Thank you. Recently, we had Frank Gaffney, the security, United States security, former security assistant secretary of State for Security Affairs, speak of really in your own language too, that Nigeria is operating a very dangerous government where people are no longer sure of their lives. Do you have anything to put to that? Because he appealed to the world to help United States to do something on that level of alleviating sudden collapse.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's it's joined by the sentiments in the Congress, especially by now Chairperson Karen Bass, the House Subcommittee on Africa, and Chris Smith, who was formerly the committee chair until the Republicans were replaced by the Democrats. But they have introduced a resolution that is quite firm in its warning. And I do think that there is a consensus that Nigeria is now sitting on a powder keg. And if the elections are fraudulent, it could explode and there could be 200 million refugees at issue. Now that makes Arab Spring look like a tea party. 200 million fleeing as you'd expect for their lives. That is how important this particular election is, not only for the immediate citizens of Nigeria, but the entire future for posterity, for generations to come.
Last time you spoke of Buhari carrying out a kind of deceitful manipulation when he spoke with Obama about continuing the government being handed over to him. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I think the disinformation campaign has several elements to it. On the one hand, he sometimes slips up because at the Institute of Peace in the United States, he said he only represents the people who voted for him, indicating that if you didn't vote for him, you're really not Nigerian anymore, which is a slip-up. But the other thing that's an earmark of Mr. Buhari is he accuses everyone who opposes them as having some ulterior motive, making up things that aren't true, and otherwise trying to undermine him because he's a Muslim for everything other than the fact that he basically is a mass murderer, which is, if you take the veil away from all these obfuscations. But he's done something, he's tried to paint himself as somebody who's uncorrupted. He's cleaning out the Augean stables. You even have today in the Financial Times an article that describes his term as a military dictator as supplying military discipline to the people of Nigeria, and omitting the fact that he came to power as a military coup and he lost power in a military coup. So the disinformation campaign continues. And I also believe it's part of his program. Every few months he announces he's totally defeated Boko Haram. Then he's rescued all the girls, but not some of them. And then these are repeatedly proven to be false. But he sends these messages out there to give a glow that, hey, he's participated as a key partner in combating international terrorism. Where I believe that if you look at the circumstantial evidence, there's some complicity between Mr. Buhari and Boko Haram. He doesn't want it to go away because then the U.S. won't sell him all these arms and weapons that he says is needed to fight Boko Haram, even when he's using them mainly against the Ibos and against the Middle States. But he's done a good job. I think in part he benefits because the Goodluck Jonathan administration, his predecessor, was so corrupt he just kind of soured anybody but Goodluck Jonathan is going to be a step forward. And he's exploited that kind of naivete, I believe, to his advantage. But Bruce, why don't you add your comment on the disinformation? You've been on the front lines.
I would say one thing to be certain of and to be clear of. We are not filing this for the purposes here today or the purposes we've undertaken is not for regime change, mostly because it doesn't work that way. The opportunity to replace the Buhari government is before the Nigerian people now. It's before the expatriate community that can still vote, the members of the diaspora that can still vote, and the members, the people of Nigeria, the citizens of Nigeria. They have the opportunity to cure this illness, to cut out the cancer, to cure the disease, to get the wolf out of their house that's killing them, killing their children, and destroying them and their way of life.
I just want to add, I think everything you said is true, but the chief prosecutor, I think, added an element saying that you can, in the process of rigging and running a fraudulent election, commit a war crime. Yes. And she was going to be vigilant because the issue right now, among others, is not whether the Nigerians may choose to vote Mr. Buhari out of office, but whether the election will be free and fair. And the chief prosecutor has jurisdiction over that, as she mentioned in her video warning. But to be candid, that's not the centerpiece of our current petition. Runs on a separate avenue.
Thank you.
And I would encourage everyone to be as brave as their heroes.
Yeah, in a follow-up on that, Bruce Fan, as an experienced international lawyer and constitution on the international law, how does the information that you have gathered in respective to the genocide against the Biafrans and against the people of Eastern region, how does it compare to all other cases that have gone through the legal proceeding of United Nations?
Well, typically what happens in these cases, and one would be, the Serbian Slobodan Milosevic, is that they ripen and you get the direct evidence after someone has lost power. Because when they remain in power, it becomes very difficult to go into their country. I mean, we see that in Saudi Arabia in the assassination of Mr. Khashoggi. The UN General Secretary's agent couldn't get anywhere. So that it's not so much whether the evidentiary case that we all suspect is there is different, but how can you get it? Because we still have due process.
Yes.
Unless you have people who are willing and able to come testify in person, I saw X, Y, Z, the case doesn't move forward. And that's why, in some sense, it remains, to be candid, it's a difficult case to prosecute as long as the target has a monopoly of violence, which is what legalized violence anyway, which is the situation we now have in Nigeria. We obviously believe that we had pled and submitted information that establishes the crimes, but it isn't just the legal landscape. The factual landscape is different here right now than it is in many of the international criminal court investigations where the target is out of power.
One of the things I think that Bruce Fein and I agree on
Just a follow-up to that, what you have given us a very good ideology, which is what you're saying is, even though this case have been made before the Chief Prosecutor of International Court of Appeal, that the sources and the continuation of the case depend on
More feedback.
Yeah, it depends upon, to be candid, having access to the witnesses and the evidence that is required to prove the case, which ordinarily necessitates the consent of the governing government. That's why and Mr. Buhari, in my judgment, would not, just like the Saudi Arabians, would not let the International Criminal Court investigators come to Nigeria if he's in power and seek to interview the witnesses. Now, sometimes there are ways to evade it. You can try to interview them outside, but it becomes much more complex than a situation when you're prosecuting a Milosevic who no longer has any power. He can't prevent investigators from talking to the people in the know. That doesn't exist right now in Nigeria.
So in addition, just like what had just transpired in Nigeria recently, where the Chief Justice was unilaterally removed by Buhari and putting in a man legal in Sharia law as the Chief Justice. What else do you hope to achieve with such a government that executes unilateral decision of the president?
Well, I mean, that's just one earmark. An election doesn't have to be perfect, to still be fair. Now, what's ominous is that it was done in an unconstitutional fashion, and it's not decisive. That I believe the Chief Justice was a Christian, and now the Chief Justice. But the fact is that there was only one reason for removing the Chief Justice. He's thought to be too independent and might rule in the electoral contest against Mr. Buhari. But another element on that score, as my partner pointed out to me, he appointed his niece to the electoral authority who will announce the winner. Now you're appointing his niece. Now his niece was not trained in electoral politics, needless to say. So when you see those acts of nepotism and registering little children who look 12 years old as being eligible to vote, you are not comforted by the idea that this election will be above board.
But I want to hasten to add that this is not about the election. This is about bringing President Buhari. We hope he's going to be former President Buhari very soon, but personally bringing President Buhari and General Buratai to justice. And one of the things that I think distinguishes this petition, not knowing, of course, and there's no way to know all of the petitions and all the things the ICC gets, but there's a couple of things that I think distinguish it. One of them is these are wrongs, slaughters, massacres, genocidal acts against segments of the population, and there's no war. There is no war. There is no political or national effort that would possibly excuse these acts or could arguably give some reason for doing it. In many of the cases, such as like in Sri Lanka, in Syria, in Yugoslavia, in the former Yugoslavia, there was a war going on. There was something happening where people were engaged in an armed conflict and people were being slaughtered, but there was a war. Here there was no war. This is a simple act of brutal genocide. The other thing that I think distinguishes this, and we're hopeful that this is true, is just the level of detail of information we provided to Madam Prosecutor. We've included photographs, we've included a great amount of documentary evidence, witness statements, very, very brave people. Quinche has very, very brave a network of very brave people in Nigeria that have done this over the past few years. Without them, this would not have been possible. This is not something that is guessing, walking into the village 3 months later, presuming there was a slaughter, presuming there was a massacre, maybe discovering a mass grave, not to get too grisly, 4 or 5 years later, or hearing anecdotal stories after the war is over. This is real-time people that Quinche is working with that are telling this story. The courage to tell this story, that are your brothers and sisters in Africa telling this story. And when I said have the courage of your heroes when you go vote, we're not here sitting in some beautiful hotel in the Netherlands cavalierly saying, oh, don't worry about it, but pursue this. This is how you cause the change that will help your children and help your life. The courage of the people that have been working with Quinche, the courage of Quinche. That is how we got to where we are today. That is how this petition got filed. That, to my mind and to our mind, I believe, is what distinguishes it from any other petition.
We at this junction are very thankful to your law firm for your fortitude and for your care and for your unalloyed resolve to make sure that justice is brought to these victims of genocide in eastern Nigeria and Biafra. And we will be following the Ofonogu media comprising of Dr. Chukunolo Ndobisi and Maduforo and Idika Kaidinambo. Will be coming to your law firm in Washington, D.C. as a follow-up to this interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very welcome.
A follow-up, would there be a press release in terms of your visit to Netherlands ICC?
Well, we certainly can describe exactly what transpired as we've relayed it to you, including the letter that the chief prosecutor provided us acknowledging the receipt of the petition, just to ensure that there's no misunderstanding. In situations where the conflict is high, the inclination to purposely or otherwise misunderstand, misrepresent, deceive what's transpired is very high. So we want to make sure that something in writing diminishes that possibility.
I have a question. You know, you could have sent the preliminary information to ICC by mail. And what was that moved you that this is beyond? What was that moved you that
go.
you risk, both of you risk to travel all the way from Washington to...
Well, it's a matter of professionalism. They take it more serious if you show up, you sit down, we talk about the problems, the evidence. We wouldn't have had to mate with someone in the chief prosecutor's office. We wouldn't have a stamped copy. We wouldn't have had a discussion as to how we can collaborate. It's human nature to be more sympathetic and have greater credibility if you see someone in person. You send it by email, I mean, that could be somebody from Uyghurs in China, as far as they know, especially in this digital age, where it's very easy to disguise the origins of any kind of transmission. But it's important to give what we call ocular evidence of seriousness by traveling as we did in ways that are disrupt your biorhythms, to show that you care enough, that you will appear, and the chief prosecutor's office will recognize that. I could imagine, although it's based on speculation, that if you get 1,000 things on your desk and they're all emails, they don't mean anything to you. There's no face attached to anything. You're just a statistic, a name out of a phone book. When you show up in person, it has a different impact.
Additionally, we're talking about people that have lost their lives. We're talking about families that have lost their husbands, their father, their brothers, their sisters. The least we could do to honor them is to travel here. And whatever inconvenience we may have suffered is negligible compared to what they have suffered. Additionally, and it bears mention, we were invited by the prosecutor to come, which I believe is highly unusual. I believe the prosecutor has some knowledge of what is going on in Nigeria. So a great deal of comfort can be taken, and perhaps even optimism. But the least we could do to honor the dead, the deceased, the people, the Ipob people, the Biafran people, and the people of Nigeria, is to come here in person and to present this. If it's important enough for them to have this court, it's certainly important enough for us to travel here and come to it.
Thank you very much, and I think this comes to the end of our interview.
Thank you very much.